And our next speaker is Simon Cheetah, if I may ask him to step on the podium. He's from the IP Center, from the help desk from the EU. So if I may, Simon has the floor. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Right. Hello, everybody. Thank you for the introduction. And also, I'd like to extend, on behalf of the China Help Desk, our thanks to the organisers for the opportunity to come and speak to you today, which we much appreciate. As you heard, I'm the team leader for the China IPR SME Help Desk. I'll tell you a bit more about the Help Desk later on in the presentation. But for now, this is a Commission-funded project that provides free support to European businesses doing business in or with China to do with intellectual property. So if you have any questions or issues about intellectual property and China business, then this is a resource that's free to you to provide you with this assistance and information. We have a sister project for which I'm also the team leader, and that's the ASEAN IPR SME Help Desk. So the Commission's also funded another help desk to help EU businesses doing business in or with the 10 Southeast Asian ASEAN member countries. This morning I just wanted to cover a few specific topics relating to IP and business in China, and this is an outline of the presentation. I have no intention of going into great legal detail in terms of what intellectual property is. I'll run over it, summarise it, and try and explain what the IP available to you is in China at the moment, and then discuss more to do with how intellectual property works or should work for you when you're doing business in China. I'll give you I've got 3 case studies to demonstrate to you. And then in the middle of the presentation there's a video, a 6-minute video, which will explain more about the help desk and what we do. And then I'll follow that up with just an outline of the free services that you can use from the help desk. So that's the presentation outline for this morning. If there's anything while I'm going through it, please don't hesitate to ask a question. So to start with, let's just briefly touch upon intellectual property in China, the laws that are available to you. When we talk about intellectual property, I think some people refer to it as intangible, those intangible assets that a company may have. I think intellectual is probably a better term. It basically includes everything that your business has that has some sort of value that can't be reduced to some sort of physical asset or a monetary cash flow. And then you can divide these into property, which may be similar to real property. It's something that can be owned and exploited and assigned. Well, intellectual property is the same. And like real property, it needs to be protected from intrusion. And then you've got this term rights. And rights means basically that they are legally protected. And legally protected by registration or because you are the one who developed or created them. So intellectual property is not patents, it's not trademarks, it's not copyright. These are just the tools for protecting those assets. And it's the same for real property. A deed is not land. It's just the tool that you would use to establish ownership and protect ownership in land. You've heard me make reference to patents and trademarks and copyrights. Patents confer in China, as they do in the European Union, they confer an exclusive right to exploit an invention, basically. very territorial in nature, so you have to file a Chinese patent in order to have protection for a patent in China. And you have to file before the innovation is disclosed to the public through, for example, marketing or selling. You can first file a patent application in a foreign country if it is a member of the Paris Convention, which all the European member states are, and then file a second application in China within 12 months. Or there's another alternative route that you could follow, and that is using the Patent Cooperation Treaty route. The Patent Cooperation Treaty route enables you to have a longer period in which to decide whether or not to file a patent in China. You basically get 30 months in which to decide whether or not you want to file your invention patent in China. That can be very helpful if you're trying to make a business decision as to whether it's worth investing the amount of money you need to invest to file a patent there. In China, you also have two other kinds of patents. Those are a utility patent or a utility model, which is a lesser form of patent. And that is available for any new technical solution relating to the shape or the structure or a combination of the shape and structure of a product which is fit for some sort of practical use. There is a lower threshold of inventiveness required for a utility patent. And I'll touch upon this later because it's quite a useful tool to use from a business point of view. And then you have a design patent, which you can also apply to register in China, which is a design for the shape, the pattern, or a combination of the shape or pattern for a product that has some sort of aesthetic feel and is fit for some sort of industrial application or use. So you can also file a design application. So those are the patents that are available to you in China. There are trademarks that you can register in China. We've already heard mention earlier that China is a first-to-file jurisdiction. That means if you have a brand or a trademark, you need to be the first one to file that brand or trademark in China in order to have the right to exclusively use it there. We heard the situation with Apple from Mr. Meng. He mentioned the cost to Apple for having to buy back the rights to use their iPad brand. So it is extremely inexpensive to file a trademark application in China, and I'll cover the cost of that in a minute. And it makes far more commercial sense to apply to register in China than it does not to. But just remember, you need to be the first to apply. And then you have another right called copyright, which essentially applies to music or literary works. It can also apply to technical drawings. It can cover your rights in brochures and websites. And it's also used for the protection of software. Copyright is automatically protected if you can prove ownership of it. But in China, there is the facility to record ownership of copyright, and that can be a very useful tool to you as well. And again, I'll touch upon that in slightly more detail later on. Those are registrable rights. There are unregisterable rights which can help protect your intellectual assets in China. For example, a trade secret. You may decide to keep a special formula or something secret, and you can protect it as a trade secret as long as it conforms to a three-step test. The first test being that it's not publicly known, it's a secret. And the second, that it has some value. Is it valuable to a competitor? And the third is that you have taken steps, and you can show that you've taken steps to keep it confidential. So there's no registration for that, and if you comply with those steps and you're aware of it, then this is a very inexpensive way of looking after an intellectual asset. So enough on the sort of technical and definitions of what's available in terms of intellectual property. There are other rights that you can use as well, and I'll explain a bit more about those as we go on. But what about the situation at the moment in China as regards intellectual property protection goes? I think you've probably already got the impression from the other speakers today that China has advanced a lot. There have been many stereotypes about what life used to be like and what work was like in China in the past. And people used to think, well, it's just not possible to protect things there. But I think you have a sense now that that's absolutely not the case. There are strong laws there. There are available intellectual property laws that are of a world standard, that are equivalent to the standard of laws that you would expect to find in the European Union. And funnily enough, China has probably a claim to have some of the oldest interests in intellectual property. If you go back to the Tang dynasty, which is about 1,300 years ago, there is arguably what was the very first trademark, which was the mark of a rabbit, and which Chinese entrepreneurs, it demonstrates that Chinese entrepreneurs recognized even that long ago the value of having a mark, a brand. So China actually has a very, very long history in relation to intellectual property. The current trend is further refinement in China's intellectual property laws. We've just had another amendment to the trademark law. And China is really bringing its laws up to a world standard. And it is providing more and more resources to help enforce intellectual property rights. Again, we've heard reference to arbitration, we've heard reference to different ways in which you can protect your intellectual property rights. There are a lot of resources available to you in China, and some of them are available to you free. So it's quite useful to be aware of what you can and cannot use. That's not to say that everything's perfect. China is an enormous country. Implementing the very best laws does not mean that they are in practice being used in the same way all through the country. That takes time. So the enforcement that you get of intellectual property rights can vary depending on where you are taking enforcement action. And it's just a reality of the size of the country. There's one area that's lagging behind, and that is in copyright, particularly to do with personality rights. So if you're in a field of business that involves protecting personality rights, that's somewhat lagging behind in terms of the standard of intellectual property right protection in China. A couple of pitfalls you need to be aware of in business. If you are attending trade fairs, there is a burden placed on the intellectual property rights owner. So if you own a trademark, there may be a burden placed on you to take some sort of affirmative action, positive action at a trade fair to stop other people using your mark. Because if you don't, you may risk at a subsequent trade fair not being able to take action to protect your right because you didn't do so the first time when you discovered the infringement. So be aware of the issues relating to trade fairs. On that topic and on many other topics, we at the Help Desk have developed a specific guide. So if you run a business and you are going to attend a trade fair and you need some ideas about the best practice, what you should do, how you should look after your rights, then please take a look at that guide. It gives you some details on what you should consider. And perhaps one other point in this, and that is more to do with patents. For the first time ever in a 5-year plan, China enshrined in the current 5-year plan, which ends at 2015, a target for the numbers of invention patents to be registered per 100,000 of the population. At the beginning, at the outset of the plan, the number was 1.7 patent registrations per 100,000. And the plan required that the country would achieve an average of 3.3 patent registrations per 100,000. Doesn't sound very much, but what you're looking at is a doubling of the number of patents within one 5-year plan period. And China has already achieved that. They've already accomplished that figure. In other words, the central government is behind some of the motivation to register intellectual property rights in China. Something worth bearing in mind if you're going there, because the Chinese businesses are becoming better and better informed about making use of intellectual property rights. So they know how to register patents and trademarks. It would be dangerous to go there without bothering to register your own rights, because for sure somebody else will have the experience to do that. Taking a look at why intellectual property rights are so important in China, apart from the reasons I've just covered, one of the fundamental reasons is that China is changing from a low-cost place to source manufacturing of products for export to Europe, to becoming a market, one of the world's strongest markets in its own right. So now we're looking at China as a place to establish research and development centres, a place to engage in cooperative development of products to sell on the China market and not just to export to other markets. I think you're probably well aware that many Chinese companies are wealthy. They've been making a lot of money. Many European SMEs are aiming to go to China to access Chinese company funds to help develop and bring their ideas and products to the marketplace. There's a skilled labour force in China. And of course, if you are going to sell in China, as we've heard, you need to be able to speak Chinese, you need to be able to establish contacts with Chinese businesses and customers, so you need links and partnerships with Chinese businesses. So developing long-term business partnerships in China has become a key goal. For all these reasons, your own intellectual property rights in your business become very important, and it's vital to register them in China. This is just to demonstrate, these are not particularly new figures, the graph continues to climb if you follow it through to newer figures than these, but it does demonstrate that the number of intellectual property rights cases going to court is increasing, it's growing steadily. And in fact, back in 2006, China set a specific goal, central government set a specific goal, and that was to establish an innovative country. They wanted to establish China as an innovative country. And they followed this goal up with a strategy, a national strategy on intellectual property in 2008. And that whole strategy is leading China at a central and local government level to put much more emphasis on intellectual property rights. And in fact, intellectual property is becoming a central theme to China's national development. So having spoken about many of the reasons why intellectual property rights is important, I thought it might help now at this stage just talk about one particular case study, and hopefully that'll start to put those messages into perspective. And this is a particular case that these are studies that are taken from the help desk, from companies that have come to the China help desk for advice and help to resolve particular issues. And this particular case involves a Belgian SME, a furniture company that actually produces a wide range of wooden furniture, from beds to cabinets. They discovered that a Hong Kong-based company had a shop and a web shop as well, selling copies of its products. And they did some sort of investigation to find out what was going on. And they discovered that the company also had a manufacturing company and a storage or warehouse facility in China. And they were using pictures from the Belgian SME's website on their own website to try and market and sell these products. So what were the intellectual property rights that were infringed in this case? Well, in this particular case, they infringed the design and the copyright of the Belgian SME. Now, they copied the product, the actual furniture products, and they offered them for sale. And they also copied the product descriptions, and they even copied the photographs that have been taken of these products to advertise them. In terms of the intellectual property rights that the SME had registered, they'd registered a trademark in Hong Kong, and they'd registered a design in Belgium. They hadn't registered or recorded their copyright anywhere at all. So you can see that from this slide what the risks are that they faced. The registered intellectual property rights didn't cover all the relevant jurisdictions where they're doing business. They hadn't registered everything that they should have registered in Hong Kong or in China. And also the infringement was taking place in two different jurisdictions, Hong Kong and China. You have separate systems for the two locations. And these were the actions that we provided advice to the Belgian SME on what to do next. The first thing may seem a bit contradictory in a way, but we advised them not to contact the infringer. And the reason was because it would simply alert the infringer that the Belgian SME was aware of what they were doing, and that could jeopardize the follow-up action that they might want to take. The first step they needed to take was to record their copyright ownership in the pictures that they'd used on their website. And having done that, then to collect evidence proving that they owned copyright in Belgium. And following that, to collect some evidence of the infringements that were happening. They needed to get samples of the infringing goods. They needed to get a copy of the web pages that were being used by the infringing company to sell the copied products, and collect information on both the company in Hong Kong and the manufacturing plant in China. As you've heard already early on in one of the presentations, in China, when you're presenting evidence to support a case, there's a heavy reliance on documentary evidence, not on verbal testimony. So when you're taking examples of web pages that have been used to copy your own web pages, it's important to get that legalized and notarized so that it can be accepted by a Chinese court if you want to take action. Only after taking all these steps did we suggest to the Belgium SME that they should then send a warning letter to the infringers. And that we also suggested they look at identifying what assets the company in Hong Kong and China may have had. If it's a company with zero or minimal assets, then it may not be commercially viable to take some sort of civil action or extensive civil action, or indeed try to sue them in court to gain some sort of compensation from them. So it would be helpful to have that information before launching an action against them. We then advise them to start administrative enforcement. Administrative enforcement in China it's kind of unique. It's a resource that's available to an intellectual property rights owner, and it's an inexpensive way to enforce and protect your rights. No reason why you cannot launch some sort of administrative action to protect your rights and simultaneously or subsequently consider some civil proceeding. And then we provided some advice on an ongoing intellectual property rights strategy for the Belgium SME, which, as you've probably gathered, involved registering other intellectual property rights in Hong Kong and China for any new designs, and copyright in the related images as well, and to register their trademark in China. And we also suggested in this case that they filed their intellectual property rights with Chinese customs to try and minimize the exports from China. China customs are unique in that they will work for you, a right owner, to stop exports. most customs around the world will work with you to stop imports. So China provides this additional service, if you will, and that's well worth considering. And these were the actions that the Belgium SME took after receiving the advice from the help desk. They immediately consulted with their Hong Kong-based intellectual property rights lawyer. They did do a follow-up investigation to assess the case and decide on the various actions that they needed to take. This case, at the time of preparing this presentation, was still pending, so I don't have the final results. So we've heard about companies copying web pages and using website information. This is a growing phenomenon. And I thought I'd just ask the question to see if people in the audience have a sense of how many people now in China actually use the internet. Does anybody want to hazard a guess? Who's going to be brave enough to put their hand up and suggest? Do you think there are 300 million internet users in China, or 600 million, or somewhere in between? Has anybody got any feel for how many there might be at the moment? No? How many? 600. You think 600? Any others? 300. He's right. It's actually more than 600. I think last count was 618 million internet users, which is, I mean, basically that's a huge number of people using the internet every day. It's inevitable that if you're in business, the internet is going to play a part of your business. And if you're doing business in or with China, then you need to think about factoring in the internet in your business plan. So this is a graph showing the internet usage development in China. Basically, every fourth person, not in China, every fourth person in the world on the internet at the moment, at any given time, is likely to be Chinese. So that's a huge usage of the internet. Where do most people use the internet in China? Well, it's along the more developed areas. If you follow the eastern seaboard, Beijing around to Shanghai, down towards Guangzhou, that general area, you will tend to get a very high internet penetration, maybe up to 70% of the population are using the internet. In the most rural places, further out to the west of China, it drops to maybe 25%. The average throughout the world, for each country around the world, is around 31% internet usage. So if you're getting up to 70% in certain areas in China, you can see that's very, very high indeed. And just should mention too that many of the internet users, bear in mind, are the middle class, urban citizens, people who have money, disposable income, people who can buy products. So, given that the internet is so important, I thought it would be worth just mentioning a few of the issues related to it if you're doing business in or with China, and inevitably you will need to use the internet. Probably the biggest threat would be to those businesses dealing directly with consumers. There are too many instances where information, websites, material are being copied and reused by other people in the most direct and obvious ways that you may face a threat. But business to business is also affected. We already heard from the last presenter that other companies were using their materials to go and try and sell products which were basically copies. So this is a real issue for business to business users as well. I think you need to be aware that internet is extremely important from a marketing and a visibility point of view. It's how people will find you and find your products and find your services. But it's also important from an IT infrastructure respect as well. I mean, use of domain names, use of email addresses. If somebody takes a domain which is very, very close to your own, then there is a danger that you may end up losing some email traffic. And perhaps one of the more famous examples is with the Dutch company Philips. where another company in China registered a domain name with one letter difference, and 2 L's on the Phillips rather than one. And inevitably, some email traffic was being diverted by mistake to the alternative domain site. So just bear in mind that even from that communication perspective, you need to consider the internet and the dangers that you may face as well. The important thing is to register your domain and domains that you're likely to use in China. That's the key. But I also wanted to mention the significance of the mobile internet users. And in China, this is a tremendously strong phenomenon. Some 420 million mobile internet users at the moment, and it's still growing. And why is that relevant? Well, the difference is that people who are using their smartphones to search on the internet, make purchases, look at business activities, they are far more likely to look for shortcuts to reach the address that they want to get to. So they are far more likely to type in part of the website address to go to the page that they want to go to. So again, if you haven't registered a domain in China, or if there are other entities out there that are registering similar domains to your own, then you may be losing the traffic from mobile users more particularly. And of course, people who are using smartphones tend to be those who are wealthier and more likely to use the internet to make purchases as well. So from a business perspective, that's kind of important. Don't want to over dramatize the internet, but just a couple of other issues to be aware of. Cybersquatting, so people trying to create some sort of false impression that they are in some way affiliated with some other entity. That sometimes happens. Online sales of counterfeits. We heard mention of Alibaba. If you go on to Alibaba and the others, Taobao, the other famous selling sites in China, then unfortunately there are a lot of copied products being sold out there. Incidentally, if you are selling products and you have a registered trademark in China and you are selling products in China, this is a good time to approach Alibaba if you want their assistance to take down sites which are selling copies of your products. As long as you can demonstrate to Alibaba and similar sites that you own the rights to that particular brand and you identify the site that's selling them, then they will receive your request and will look at taking down those sites. Alibaba is looking to go for a public listing, so they are probably more likely to respond to you at the moment than in the routine scheme of things. So a good time to take action to try and have your copies of your products taken down. But it does depend on you having registered your trademark in China. Basically in China, there are very little restrictions on what can be registered as a domain in China. Very little restrictions. And it does follow a first-to-file domain registration system. So, as I say, do try and get in and register as early as possible. I just briefly cover this particular issue with online IPR issues. It's called slamming. This is where you may receive various emails from some unknown service provider advising you that someone's about to register a domain name similar to yours and offering to instead step in and maybe provide you a service of registering a domain name. And they're probably people you've never heard of. In many instances, this can be a bit of a scam. I just wanted you to be aware of it. If you register your own website and you have a service provider who does that for you, go to your own service provider and ask them to arrange to register in China, or go to choose one of the registered and recognized companies in China. You can get some information on that either from us or if you do some searches. My advice is not to respond to those who come to you out of the blue, unsolicited emails, trying to get you to pay them to take some sort of action on your behalf. So this is really just a quick recap in a way. I hope you've appreciated that intellectual property is really an economic tool. Owning intellectual property is about how you can turn creativity and know-how, knowledge in your company into a bankable asset. If you sell your company at some stage in the future, it's going to be worth more if you have registered your designs, registered your brands, and registered them in the countries that you are either doing business in or with. And of course, if you want to license production of any product that you produce, or perhaps of your creation or your brand, then it's absolutely vital that you register your rights in that brand or that design in the country where you're going to license it before you start entering into any agreement with some partner in the country. It's not costly. China has recently actually reduced the official filing fees for registering trademarks in China. But even if you need to use, which you probably do, a trademark agent to help you carry out the registration, you're looking at somewhere between 500 euros to a maximum of 1,000 euros to register a trademark. And given the potential consequences of not registering, it really is not commercially sensible to avoid registering your brand there. So do try and register. Okay, just now take a look at a different case. There are 3 case studies. This is the second one. There's one more after this. This one was a Swedish engineering SME. They were exporting components to the graphic art industry worldwide, and they noticed that their sales in China had decreased in the past year, and they discovered a Chinese company selling copies of its products as well as using its marketing materials. And in this case, their patents, trademark and copyright had all been infringed. They had actually registered patents in China and in Sweden, and they'd registered trademark in China and Sweden. And they were unable to provide any copyright. So they lacked protection of their marketing materials under copyright. They were unable to prove, if you want to claim ownership, copyright ownership in your marketing materials, you must be able to establish who created the marketing materials in the first place and provide that background information. So if you're unable to do that, then you may not be able to get copyright protection. But all their other intellectual property rights were registered in China. Again, in this particular case, having discussed it with them, we advised them initially not to contact the infringer. They were able to establish copyright in the photographs in this particular case, not in the other material in their the written marketing material. And we advised them to go and collect some evidence of the infringements. They needed to have some samples of the infringing goods. And again, it was important to have these sample purchases notarized and legalized so that they could use the information in court in China. And the difference between this case and the Belgium furniture company is that the Swedish company had registered patents in China and therefore had very strong grounds to enforce their intellectual property rights, either when going for administrative action or going to the courts to take some sort of judicial action. And in fact, in this case, the final product was an exact copy, including the Swedish SME's trademark as well. And we advised them after doing this initial work, only then send the warning letter, and again, try and collect some information on the assets of the company. In this particular case, after receiving the advice, the Swedish company consulted with a China IP lawyer and also worked with an investigation company to collect evidence to initiate. They decided they were going to go for the administrative action against the infringer. And again, we're waiting for the outcome of this case. There's no easy solution when it comes to protecting intellectual property in China. I think the recommendation is to have a strategy, to be aware of the need to register intellectual property rights, and to be aware that investors expect there to be some sort of protection for the intellectual property rights that your company has. It can be helpful to develop a patent portfolio if you have inventions and products that you are developing in that way. Look at using more than one type of right to protect your intellectual property in China. Each intellectual property right is very narrow in terms of what it protects. It's a very narrow focus. A patent is going to protect your invention, but it will not protect your brand or your trademark, or vice versa. So it's worth bearing in mind that it may be dangerous to rely on just one right. Always better to take what we call a layered approach. Register additional rights to give broader protection and broader strength to your intellectual assets in your company as well. Having that broader protection with more than one right is much, much harder for your competitors or infringers to defeat. And the last case study, there's a short video to show you after this. But this last case study involves a Greek SME selling beauty products in China. And they actually had two product lines under two different brands, and one started before the other. They had started one product line and developed a relationship with a Chinese distributor some years earlier. And unfortunately, in that case, they had agreed for their distributor in China to register their trademark in China on their behalf. So the trademark was actually owned by the Chinese distributor. And for the second, they were under negotiations with another distributor, and they decided that they wanted some advice from the China Help Desk before finalizing their arrangement with the second distributor. So the intellectual property rights in this case were trademarks. They'd only registered their own trademarks in Greece and in some other EU countries. The other trademark had been registered by the distributor in China. So they lacked the trademark protection in China. This is what we suggested they did. We suggested that they immediately file for trademark registration in China for the second trademark, the newer one. We advised them to consider licensing the trademark in China to that distributor, as opposed to asking for payments of royalties for its use. And we advised them to clearly state the limitations and what they could and could not do in terms of using that trademark, and to include a provision that the distributor could not file any application for an identical or similar trademark during the entire licensing agreement, and the suggested time for the licensing agreement was 10 years, which is the amount of time that you would register a trademark before you have to renew it. We also advise them to insert clauses on marketing and promotional activities, and pending the actual registration of the trademark, we suggested that perhaps they could work with the Chinese distributor as a licensee, registered in Greece solely for the trademark registered in Greece, solely for China, until the registration in China for that mark came through. So that was for the relatively easier, if you will, strategy to look at. But in terms of the original trademark, which was already owned by a Chinese distributor, really their option was to consider negotiating to buy back the trademark, or to review the terms of their business relationship, in some way try to leverage the value of the trademark. And we gave them some advice on what possible actions they could take under Chinese law. The SME did start more cautious negotiations with the new distributor, and they consulted with a China IP lawyer with reference to possible actions on the older trademark. But this is a clear example of the difficulties that you can get into if you allow somebody else to be the first to file, first to register your trademark in China. The easy solution and the cost-effective solution is to register first. So now I'm going to show you this brief video, which will give you a sense of what the China Help Desk does and how we can support you.
Because we are out of time.
Oh, okay. 6 minutes? Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
I've worked in China for 2 years, and I have encountered many IP issues of the European SMEs in China. The most common challenges that the European SMEs face in China in terms of protecting of their intellectual property is the lack of preparation for coming to China. Secondly, if the companies are infringed, if their intellectual property is infringed, they should take actions in order to enforce their rights.
I think the major challenge for European SMEs is absolutely to know all the aspects under which their IP right can be violated and to act in advance in order to protect them. This China Help Desk is very useful in my opinion because very often many enterprises don't know that there are services for free offered by public institutions.
Today's event was extremely useful to set the directions of what we need to be looking at. So it's a good way for us to understand what are the main things that we need to be looking at, to afterwards discuss what are our own strategy, our own priorities, and make sure that we address those first, together with the help of the China IPR Help Desk, which has already been very useful to us to spend a lot of time with us to answer our questions, to tell us exactly where we need to focus at the beginning and help us set the first steps for better IPR protection.
I think for freelancers and small companies in China, it is quite tough for copyright because of their budgets are very small. But at the same time, they face the same issues as bigger companies. I think the event today was very nice. We've had some good cooperation with the IPR SME Help Desk before. And what I really like is that it constantly gives you a possibility to get professional help and professional feedback on what you're doing in your daily business. And this is really useful for developing further.
I think the main challenge for us and for clients that we work with has been getting the right information, knowing where to get it. So what the help desk is doing, I think it's very useful in that respect because it's kind of channeling people, to get the answers or see where, they can get help in that respect. Today's event actually made me think about our own personal IP.
There's definitely quite a few things that I learned about IP and then its protection, since that's not my area of expertise. First, you need to protect your IP. If you have something real, you have to take care of it. Secondly, you need to do your homework to find out what the Chinese are doing in relation to your IP and then find out whether there's real competition facing you. And then, of course, there's the SME help desk that can help you to navigate through the first few steps of getting yourself started in China.
IP right protection has been always in our list, but I believe it's a problem of quite many SME companies to set that as a priority issue. The help desk is helping to move this issue and this task up in the list for us.
The IPR protection in China is changing all the time. Now, I remember when the EU-China help desk arrived in China in about 2008, and things have changed tremendously since then, and I'm sure the help desk has helped influence that for the benefit of European companies. When European companies think about protecting their IP, it very much depends on the IP they're endeavouring to protect. The first thing is to make sure it is unique, original, and upholdable. The second thing to remember is it changes every day in China. So keep in contact with the help desk. They know what's going on. Most other people don't. So just please use the help desk.
Right. We're kind of out of time, so I'm just going to mention one other thing and then close. The help desk, as you've heard, is a free of charge service, so feel free to contact us. You can send email inquiries or contact us by phone, whatever's convenient to you. And we provide a lot of guides and information which is available to you free. But we've also just developed a game that you can access via the website. It's kind of good fun, so I'd urge you, if you get a chance, to go online and give it a go. It's you as starting up a business in China. The key is to make some money, make a success of it, and it throws up a few issues along the way to see whether you can overcome them. And if you happen to make the most money on this business during a particular week, then you'll win a prize from the help desk as well, just to encourage you. But I've played it. It's quite entertaining, and it's worth a few minutes of your time. So I hope you'll take a look at that. This is how you can be in touch with us, either the China help desk or the ASEAN help desk, and there is our address online, china-iprhelpdesk.eu, or you send an email to us if you want any advice, a question at china-iprhelpdesk.eu. I'll be around later, so if you have any questions, I'd be happy to hear them. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Simon Cheetah. I would like to really appreciate that Simon Cheetah flew from London this morning just for you guys. And after a really brief break for 5 minutes, Mr. Jankowski flew from Poland, so he'll talk to you right next. Thank you very much.